Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing a double buffed Pokemon that is very strong in the NAIC Championship meta, and that Pokemon is Sylveon. Sylveon this season gets access to Fairy Wind and Shadow Ball, and when those two are paired with its legacy move of Psyshock, it gives Sylveon incredible pacing and really great coverage into this entire meta. I ran a pretty basic, pretty strong meta team today. Grumpig, Sylveon as the save switch, and Shadow Galarian Weezing as the closer. And even despite my many misplays with this team, the team still produced very consistent results. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and we pick up a great lead in game number 1, Grumpig into Weezing. A lot of Weezing players like to stay in and go for a brutal swing to get big chip damage or a shield, and I decide that I'm not going to let that happen. I get the catch and sneak of the brutal swing onto my own Weezing, and that's going to bait out my opponent's Grumpig. My opponent's going to be in a bit of an awkward spot here. Do they decide to give up a shield and go for the full farm down, or do they fire all their energy? I think my opponent does make the better play here, which is to put up the shield, sidewave all the way down, and then exit up a massive amount of energy to threaten shields off my Grumpig when I bring it back in. However, I'm up a shield, so I'm pretty comfortable double shielding, going for the full sidewave down. My opponent could probably look to pivot out after pressuring this final shield, but I do have quite a bit of energy to work with. It turns out my opponent actually has their own Sylveon in the back. Very cool. My Sylveon is a pretty bad IV. It is a 15, 14, 14, and we're going to get the catch and sneak of the Shadow Ball onto my Sylveon. Unfortunately, I just don't have a better Sylveon. If I did, I would run it. But the one good thing about these IVs is I'm always going to be winning charge stack priority in the mirror. This means I get to land my Shadow Ball, inflict devastating damage onto their Sylveon, and they're trapped on the field until they fire off their Shadow Ball. They undercharge, snipe down with the Weezing, but unfortunately for them, the Weezing is just not going to get to the brutal swing. I'm able to outpace, make it to the Shadow Ball, and to the Shadow Weezing. They're never surviving. They do get knocked out there, and now they can bring back in the Grumpig, but I will make Dynamic Punch, and I'm safe to throw it knowing that all they have left in the back is a 1 HP Sylveon with no energy. So down goes Grumpig, Sylveon gets Sidewave down, and that's going to be a Game 1 win. We pick up a very bad lead in Game number 2, leading Grumpig into Kecleon. I'm going to save switch into Sylveon, and my opponent's going to respond with Hypno. There are so many Psychic types in this meta, and that's part of what makes the Shadow Ball coverage on Sylveon so incredible. Shadow Ball's not going to one-shot, but look at that damage, my goodness. Sylveon, even with my bad IV, should be able to hang on here to a Shadow Ball. I'm not able to hang on by much, but I'm able to hang on, and I'll fire off Shadow Ball number 2 into the Hypno. Hypno is going to be no shielding, so switch advantage has been won, and my opponent's going to get an energy head start on their Grumpig. Being down energy in a Grumpig mirror isn't a great place to be, but considering the fact that switch advantage was won, I'm still feeling pretty good about where I'm at in this game, just because my Shadow Galarian Weezing when all shields go down should be very, very strong. I actually get some really good information out of this matchup as well, learning that I win charge stack priority over my opponent's Grumpig. I'm able to make Shadow Ball number 2, and as soon as I throw this, the game is basically just over, because the Shadow Ball is actually on the CMP time once again, and I can just fully sacrifice my Grumpig and win the game with the Galarian Weezing. So Weezing will hit the field, Brutal Swing is going to absolutely shred through the Grumpig's remaining health bar, and then all my opponent has left in the back is the Kecleon. Kecleon is a very cool pick for this meta, but it really does not appreciate Fairy types due to the Sucker Punch resist. My opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. We've got mirror leads in the next match, Grumpig into Grumpig. Grumpig is far and away the top usage Pokemon in this meta. If you guys remember back to the NAIC Championship meta, which was in the fall, as my opponent makes an insane Dynamic Punch bait call, the top used Pokemon there was Oranguru. Well, the Oranguru of this meta is Grumpig. The coverage is just undeniably incredible. My opponent made an incredible bait call there, putting me very far behind, but luckily they end up sacking the Grumpig and sending in Kecleon. I pivot out, I save the Grumpig, I send in Sylveon, they respond to my Sylveon with theirs, and suddenly, even despite the fact that my opponent made an insane bait call in the lead matchup, I still feel like I'm in a pretty good spot. I should survive any one charge attack here. My opponent will full set the Shadow Ball. I'm going to build up to Shadow Ball, but I'm going to go for the Psyshock. I think if my opponent tries to farm down, I can maybe make another Psyshock. It's going to be pretty close. And it looks like I would have made it. My opponent's forced to throw energy. Now I can bring in the Grumpig. And then, once my opponent pivots into Kecleon, it's going to be time to send in the Weezing. In comes Kecleon, firing off the Thunder Punch. No, they're actually on Foul Play, and Foul Play will knock me out. But because they're on Foul Play, that means everything they throw is going to be resisted. Normally, Kecleon would be on Thunder Punch, Dynamic Punch, but if they're on Foul Play and Dynamic Punch, then Weezing's just a complete wall to all their energy. I can overfarm quite a bit, fire off the Sludge, Sludge sets up the Fairy Wind down, and there's just too much energy on the Weezing, and my opponent will resign the match. What do you know? It's another Kecleon in the next match. We're going to immediately pivot out into the Sylveon, and I'm going to be answered with Feraligatr. This is a pretty bad bait by me. I should always be full sending in this matchup, because if my opponent calls it, I don't think I can Fairy Wind down. I was up enough energy that I could have always full sent the Shadow Ball, and I believe just won the 2s there. So that was a pretty big misplay on my part. These were my first few games playing Sylveon, and honestly, I wasn't too familiar with the damage ranges, but luckily my opponent ends up playing the zeros and giving me switch advantage. However, the happiness is short-lived as in comes a Alolan Raichu, and Alolan Raichu is a deadly, deadly Pokemon in this meta. Raichu lands the Wild Charge, simultaneous switch, Kecleon into the Weezing. I know that I can't take the knockout here with the Sludge, so I'm going to try and go for the double Brutal Swing route. Double Brutal Swing I know will definitely take the KO. I don't think I could have farmed down after landing the Sludge before they made it to 2 Thunder Punches. So I put up the shield, and they're on Foul Play once again. I guess I'm just wrong about what moveset people are running on Kecleon, but if they're running Foul Play, then they can't ever really damage the Weezing. So I can farm up to 100 energy, and with this much residual energy, I can win the game. I fire off the Brutal Swing, throw 1 Fairy Wind, throw Brutal Swing number 2. You already know what comes next. We're throwing another Fairy Wind. We're throwing Brutal Swing number 3. And then I can pivot into the Grumpig. Just so much super effective damage. Raichu getting absolutely suffocated under the weight of these charge attacks. 3 Brutal Swings, a Shadow Ball. Down goes Raichu. Game over. We get a terrible lead in the next match. Grumpig into Shadow Samurott. Immediate pivot from me into the Sylveon. Samurott's going to stay in and fire off Shadow Hydro Cannon. Hydro Cannon will hit for some pretty monster damage here, so I will put up the shield. Now my opponent's going to pivot out and send in Hypno. Hypno will take big super effective damage from Shadow Ball, but as we've learned, if they're not the Shadow, they can actually survive. They're going to put up the shield on the first, continue to overfarm, and I'm going to go for Shadow Ball number 2. My opponent can never afford to double shield because they have the very glassy Samurott on the lead. I don't think Thunder Punch will knock out from here, and my opponent agrees full sending the Shadow Ball. My goal is pretty simple. Shield the Shadow Ball, get a full farm down, and then have a bunch of energy to threaten the Samurott. My opponent's counterplay to this is what they do right here, which is pivot into the Samurott. Now, I can't really send in the Weezing because Weezing's always going to get outpaced. So I think my best play is to bank some energy on the Grumpig and then send in the Weezing. If they're going to make a Shadow Hydro Cannon anyway, I may as well save energy on the Grumpig in case I can one-shot whatever's in the back. Hydro lands, that damage is just absolutely absurd. Shadow Samurott, what a sick pick. Brutal Swing will take the KO. It's their own Grumpig in the back, and unfortunately, I have lost this game. The reason being is that Shadow Ball does not one-shot in the Grumpig mirror. It comes very close to one-shotting, but it does not one-shot. Shadow Ball lands, they survive, and that's going to be game over. Man, Shadow Samurott, that's a Pokemon I do really want to try after that battle, because my opponent absolutely destroyed me with it. We see a pretty familiar lead in the next match, Grumpig into Weezing. I go for the catch. This time I don't actually get the sneak, so I mistimed it. I threw 8 Psywaves instead of 7. I do get the catch to the Brutal Swing, and same game plan as before, I'm able to bait out the Grumpig. If they try and farm down, I'm always making a second Brutal Swing and pressuring away a shield. My opponent decides against the farm down, they're going to throw energy. I'm very okay letting this go. I could go for the 1 shield farm down, but I'm a little worried my opponent's going to pivot out, so I decide to overfarm and just knock them out with the resistant dynamic. This is going to leave me up energy for whatever my opponent sends in here, because they're definitely not bringing in the Weezing. And look at the spice! My opponent brings in Shadow Zatu, and I could be in some very serious trouble. I fire off the Shadow Ball, Zatu puts up the shield. These Pecks are destroying my Grumpig. I think they may even be able to knock out with the Psyshock here. I'm going to no-shield, hoping I survive. I do not, and the game is all up to Sylveon. I'm going to need to manage my energy perfectly with Sylveon if I want a chance to win this game. I shield up as Zatu goes for the Psyshock. They try and CMP tie on Psyshock number 2. They knocked out my Grumpig with a Psyshock. I wonder if I can knock out their Zatu with one of my own. So I overfarm massively, go for the resistant Psyshock. Zatu not known for its bulk. Psyshock will take the KO, and back in comes the Weezing. Weezing's 5 off the move. I'm 4 off the back-to-back. It all comes down to this. Who wins charge attack priority, Sylveon or the Weezing? It's Sylveon winning charge attack priority. They're never going to get that Sludge. Super effective Psyshock picks up the knockout, and we survive an incredibly scary team. Speaking of scary Pokemon, we have the Face of Fear in the next match as I lead Grumpig into Shadow Swanna. Shadow Swanna is a Pokemon that I tried last week in the Open Great League, and it was an absolute terror. It is not very tanky, but my goodness, the fast move pressure is absolutely absurd. The one good thing I have going for me as Grumpig is I'm slightly faster when it comes to pacing, so I'm able to outpace them, make a dynamic punch, actually neutralize the Swanna, and win the lead. My opponent sends in Sylveon, I'm going to pivot into my own, and it doesn't matter what they throw, I'm always going to be no shielding here. They're going to be full sending Shadow Ball. That hits for some pretty significant damage. And I decide that since I'm down energy, I may as well try going for the double Psy Shock. Even if it can't take the knockout, it should put them pretty low. I overfarm, trying for the CMP tie, and I actually get the CMP tie. The 15 attack Sylveon coming in clutch. We're able to secure the knockout. In the back is Miltank. They did get one turn bring in, but I'm still going to throw after 4 Fairy Winds, so it's still good timing. Psyshock lands, I can send to the Weezing, and yeah, there's just no path forward for my opponent in this game. They have a ton of energy on the Miltank, but the Miltank has already been chipped. If the Miltank was at full HP, it feels like this would be a very different ending to the story, but I still have all 3 Pokemon left alive, Sludge shielded up. They're just going to farm up, fire off another Body Slam, and I'm always going to be shielding. As long as I can make a move on the Weezing, and I'm able to get there and only one more Fairy Wind, this game is over. Sludge into the Miltank will connect. I get to snipe down with 2 Fairy Winds. And the team, even despite seeing some crazy picks, is still very consistent. However, we get a bad lead in the next match. Not quite the Samurott we saw in a previous match, but this time, we're queuing into the middle stage evolution, and that is going to be Dewott. Dewott's a Pokemon that I also made a video on. Dewott, I think, is a very strong pick in this meta. Water plus Bug is just really good coverage in this meta. Miltank lands the Thunderbolt. Really nice decision for my opponent to go for the full send there, because 2 Body Slams I could have easily survived. But a Thunderbolt into a Body Slam, I think I'm actually not going to survive because of the high attack Sylveon. Come on, Sylveon, please survive, but we don't. We get KO'd. I send in the Grumpig, and my opponent immediately pivots into the Dewott and Raichu. Really, really nice play for my opponent, not letting me get the farm down. Raichu boosts up with the Trailblaze. Raichu always shields no matter what you throw at it, so I will go for the Dynamic Punch bait. The bait is successful. Now I pivot into the Weezing. These boost and volt switches are starting to shred through the Weezing. I'm forced to shield everything now. My opponent has high incentive to just go for the Trailblaze and ramp up the fast move pressure more and more and more. I fire off Brutal Swing. They'll put up the shield. I will make another Brutal Swing. There's the pivot out into the Miltank, and I miscount. I should have fired off the Brutal Swing, but unfortunately, I was not aware of how much residual they had, and that's going to cost me. I fully commit to the farm down. I get the farm down, and there's actually a chance to win this game. I'm going to need to manage my energy perfectly. I need to put myself 1 off a Brutal Swing for when they bring back in the Raichu. So I farm up, I fire off the Sludge, but my opponent's able to get there. Maybe I could have knocked out with a Brutal Swing. It would have been really close, but in the moment, I didn't think I could have knocked out with a Brutal Swing, so I thought I had to commit to the Sludge. I guess I had to try for the double Brutal there, but unfortunately, I get outpaced, and we will end up losing that game. What do you know? It's another Grumpig mirror in the next match, but my opponent opts out, and they're going to save switch into normal Castform. Normal Castform does have Hex. I think this is my first time seeing normal Castform in this meta. Normal Castform will have access to Energy Ball, I'm just realizing, so that's probably why this trainer is running normal Castform with Weather Ball and Energy Ball. At this point, I'm pretty okay, more or less just sacrificing the Galarian Weezing. They're able to get me very low, but I'm able to make another Sludge. And this is going to pressure away the final shield or just take the knockout. No, it actually doesn't take the knockout. They survive on 1 HP. I was so wrong. They bring in their Grumpig, but they're just simply down energy in a Grumpig mirror, and that's not a good spot to be in. Throwing the Shadow Ball right away would have been pointless for me because I hadn't yet done enough Psywave damage where the Shadow Ball would actually KO. So instead, I shield, overfarm just shy of 100 energy, go for the Shadow Ball, and that's going to be picking up the knockout. My opponent's going to bring in Sylveon, and I'm just up too much energy. Sylveon, normally with Shadow Ball, pretty solid into Grumpig, but I just started with an entire Shadow Ball loaded, so Grumpig is just taking over this game. Shadow Ball after Shadow Ball, shredding through the Sylveon, and Sylveon can't even farm down. They're forced to fire off energy. Grumpig, the grumpiest of pigs, he definitely did his job in this game, and now I can bring my Sylveon into theirs. I think I always end up shielding here, just because even if they do end up baiting with the Psyshock, I know that I can always survive whatever the Castform is throwing. Castform will fire off the Energy Ball, I tank that, and I exit with the Psyshock loaded to win the game. So Castform, a pretty cool Spice pick. I don't know if it's a Spice pick I would necessarily try. I think the one that I was most impressed with so far was probably that Shadow Samurott or that Shadow Zatu. Both of those Pokemon looked incredibly, incredibly fun. We pick up a pretty decent lead in the final match, Grumpig and a Mantine. Mantine connects with the Water Pulse, and they're probably going to try and take the knockout with the Twister and a few more wing attacks. I have 2 Pokemon that double resist Twister, so it would be malpractice of me to not get the catch and sneak and absorb that damage onto Sylveon where it's double resisted. Sylveon unfortunately did not get the sneak. Clearly I was not on top of my catch and sneak game today. Normally, I'm pretty good about getting that fast move sneak as well, but I guess I was just not on top of it today whatsoever. My opponent boosts up with Trailblaze, and I'm going to go for a diabolical Psyshock bait. Raichu's love to shield, and that's going to cost him, as now I can make the Shadow Ball and really ramp up the pressure on my opponent. Shadow Ball pressures the final shield. I pivot into the Grumpig, and all that boosted Raichu energy goes down the drain. The energy from earlier, picking up the knockout, and that should instantly end the game. It doesn't matter what my opponent has in the back. They have a low-kick Shadow Gallade, an incredibly spicy Pokemon. Maybe I'm not out of the woods just yet. If this thing has Synchronoise, I could be in trouble, but the moment I lock in a CMP tie, I know I've won this game. I put up the shield, it's going to be a Leaf Blade bait, and they're just never going to get to throw that Synchronoise, because Brutal Swing is easily going to be knocking out Gallade. Gallade falls, all that's left in the back is Mantine. My opponent realizes they just don't have the HP, and they will resign the match. When it comes to top climbing teams for the NAIC Championship meta, I think this is probably one of the best ones that you could play. It's a very basic strategy. I'm not a big fan of ABB style teams in the Open Great League. I do feel that they tend to feel a little bit more predictable, but in these limited metas where the power level is lower, I feel like you can oftentimes play more linearly, and in that case, an ABB team like this can actually work quite nicely. I do think that the weird tech of switching out after 7 Psy Waves, if they stay in with Weezing and a Grumpig to catch the Brutal Swing onto your own Galarian Weezing, ends up being a very effective tactic in a Blind 3 format like the Go Battle League, because you're unlikely to play the same opponent twice, so they won't necessarily see it coming. But keeping your Grumpig with extra energy and basically at full HP will almost always pay dividends. I think this meta a lot of the times comes down to, if you're the better Grumpig player in that match, if you end up utilizing your Grumpig in the most effective manner, you're probably going to win the game. And I think metas like that are honestly very cool. I really like Sylveon's presence in this meta. Sylveon ends up feeling like a very neutral Pokemon. It has super effective coverage into a lot of Pokemon, like Shadow Ball into all of the Psychic types. It is Psyshock for the Galarian Weezing. And while those moves are never picking up one-hit KOs, it does allow Sylveon up energy to be kind of an awkward Pokemon for trainers to try and answer. I think probably the most effective anti-Sylveon Pokemon that I saw was the trainer who switched in Miltank, as by having that double resistance to Shadow Ball, it forced me to go for the non-step Psyshock, and while Psyshock is a pretty good move, against the bulk of Miltank, Miltank just shrugged off that damage like it was nothing. But I'm a big fan of Sylveon. I would love at some point to try and get a better IV Sylveon that I could play in this cup. Unfortunately, I just don't have one. I evolved a lot of EVs during Calm Days in the past, but unfortunately, it looks like I never evolved a better Sylveon than this. This was originally planned to be a Master League Sylveon, and I just never powered it up, and that's the only reason I actually had one to try. But I'm very happy that I did, because Sylveon feels like a real threat in this meta. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching content like this, please do help support the channel. Leave a like on the video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and an extra special thank you as always to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide to the channel is so appreciated, so thank you guys oh so very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.